genetically. What are the advantages of GMOs and so on? Like not everything is good. At the same time, not everything is bad. So it helps to have this kind of a small part of communicating with the public, and them being aware of how food is produced is very important when we develop IPM strategies. So these parts that you are seeing are part of the management aspect, and then we have the business aspect of the IPM model, where where basically it is the sellers these days, they decide what needs to be sold with the strategy of strategically placing organic foods in certain parts of the store, consume, and then advertisement and all those things, whether it is any kind, you know how it goes. So consumers are attracted to these strategies, and then sellers, actually, they are the ones who determine what producers have to produce these days. It is no longer consumers demanding this. Not sometimes, it generally looks like consumers are asking for organic foods or certain types of foods, but it is not them, because of how they are exposed to the strategic placement of these food items in the market, or advertisement spaces. So they are, their decisions are governed by sellers, and producers have to produce whatever the seller actually wants. And then the final part is the economic viability, environmental safety, and social acceptability of food production. This is more, it is the environmental aspect of it. We want our food to be safe, and at the same time, we want it to be affordable to everybody. And we have to think about growing global population and who can actually afford food. So an IPM-based food production ensures food security and optimizes the production cost so that more people can afford it and feel safe about it. And at the same time, it also optimizes the returns for the grower. So this is in summary about the new IPM model. And where biostimulants fit into this model is the cultural practices. They are not, any of these things here, microbial or chemical control, they don't go anywhere else, but it is the cultural practices, how you use biostimulants as cultural, as a part of cultural control, so that we can achieve pest suppression. Now, I just want to present this definition of a plant biostimulants. So these could be microbes or microbial derivatives, or there could be of mineral origin, or from the sea creatures, or like there are seaweeds and other things, and they could be of botanical origin. Any of these that have a stimulatory effect on the plant, and then they induce systemic resistance, and they could be improving the nutrient and water uptake, or they could be promoting plant growth and they improve plant health, or they impart resistance to or tolerance to various kinds of biotic or abiotic pressures. But they should not have any nutritional value, or they should not have any pesticidal properties. Does this definition make sense? Does it make sense to everybody? I can't see everybody, but I see a few nods. So now that you approve, I will tell whose definition it is. So now it is safe to reveal. Now, otherwise I would be concerned. If you criticized, I would have not shown that name, right? But basically biostimulants are anything of biological origin. They could be living or organisms or non-living material. But the key here is it should not have nutritional or pesticidal properties, technically, but we will see what exactly they are. So before getting into that, I want to briefly show you something else, is about microbes. We all evolved from and we all are associated with microorganisms, right? Everybody knows with the current knowledge about all the microbes or human microbiome and all those, we know that we coexist with these trillions of microorganisms in and on us. And if you look at our genes and the microbiome, the genes of all the microbes, so there are a lot more. There are more than 3 million, whereas ours is only 23,000. And then why do we coexist with them, and what is the advantage? Like, so we actually, it is not just a coexistence, it is a co-evolution. So we cannot live without them. And it is not just a competitive displacement that they act on, like, having these microbes on our body to prevent pathogenic organisms. So the space is already taken, so the pathogens are less likely to attack us. Not just that, that's no longer the case. They do influence a lot of things, and they control our mind, they control our gut health, they control our various biological processes. So there has been a lot of research, as you frequently see, to highlight the importance of microorganisms on human health. So this is just an example of what the kind of positive impact the microbes have, the gut microbiota especially, like, whether it is like single chain fatty acids or lipoproteins or various kinds of things. I might have mentioned this incorrectly. I forgot, but there are various chemicals or biological processes that we have, and beneficial microbes or gut microflora helps them to regulate. So you can see, the probiotic intake and dietary fiber intake can have this increased antioxidants, improved lipid metabolism, low gut inflammation, increased insulin sensitivity, reduced risk of infections, and a lot more impact on how the cognitive abilities and so on. So there is a lot of research that has been done and showing the importance of microbes. So if you think humans who are supposed to be smarter organisms, but we know that we are not the smartest, supposed to be smarter, who can be, who can do things a lot more than plants can, have this much of an association with microbes and benefit from them. You can imagine plants cannot even move. They can't talk. Well, they can't talk. They do talk through chemical signals, but plants have to evolve. They cannot move, so they cannot run away from danger. So you can imagine how much more complex their evolution with microbes and how they use them. So that is the key here about, when we talk about biostimulants. So if you look at just the research, how much research is done about gut microbiota and plant biostimulants. When I gave this talk a few months ago, I gathered this information. So look at what had been done. It is a simple Google Scholar search, and I looked at what was how many publications were there during these 100 years, then the next 10 years, and just in 2021. You see a similar, more or less similar kind of a pattern in both. So researchers have been studying them all along. It is only in the past few years you hear more about biostimulants, but they have been around. Their benefits or whatever kind of impact they have on plants has been studied as much as the gut microbiota. So as things become more and more complex, whether it is human health or crop production, the trend is more or less the same in terms of finding solutions and going back more towards the natural things, natural solutions. Then if you look at the nutrition part of plants, we all know that when you have an undernourished plant, it doesn't grow well, And it is, as a result, it is usually vulnerable to biotic and abiotic stressors. And then as a result of that, the yields are reduced. We know that. And then at the same time, when you overnourish a plant, what happens? It grows, it seems to be growing well. In a lot of cases, it does seem to be giving more yields, but you also have to realize that a lot of times the growth might be misguided. It might be more of a vegetative growth. For example, you want the nutrients to be directed towards the reproductive structures like fruits and vegetables, but sometimes it could be just a vegetative growth, and we may not be getting the kind of higher yield in all crops. And then it definitely, when you have excessive, whether it is nitrogen or phosphorus, when there is too much of something like these nutrients, it changes the physiology. It increases the carbohydrate content, reduces the phenols, which are important for plant defenses, making the plants more attractive to these biotic stressors. And as a result, you might be running into reduced yields. It may not look like it is always the case, but that could be happening there in some crops. And at the same time, even a bigger impact we have here is from excessive fertilizer application is like environmental pollution. And this again got a lot of attention in the past few years. So there is a reason for using balanced nutrition for plants. So when you have a well-nourished plant with balanced nutrition, the growth is optimal, health is optimal, and yields and returns, like economic returns, are all optimal, because it is growing as it should grow, providing enough nutrient, enough yields without all the negative impacts. Now nutrition part is over. Now we're looking at how healthy plants or maintaining healthy plants plays a role in IPM. It just seems, whenever we talk about IPM, we frequently think about biocontrol or applying things, or whether it could be employing the pheromones or applying pesticides. We usually look at those kinds of things, but we have to look at maintaining healthy plants could be a lot more beneficial in crop protection than just spraying pesticides. So when you have healthy plants, they're less attractive and vulnerable to pests, as we just saw, and they withstand pest damage or any kind of unfavorable environmental conditions better. And then when they have these kind of, when you have healthy plants, even when there is some kind of damage, the yield can, the plant can withstand the damage and compensate for losses, because it still produced what it intended to produce. And then most importantly, it can reduce the reliance on those kinds of crop protection, whether it is spraying pesticides or releasing biocontrol agents. And then all of this actually contributes to minimize the risks associated with the excessive fertilizers or pesticides. Insect resistance management is an important part with whenever we frequently apply effective pesticides, very soon we have pests and diseases becoming like pathogens, becoming resistant to those pesticides. So we need to be careful. So when you maintain healthy plants by with these biostimulants, you can have all these benefits, and that contributes to IPM. And what are some good cultural practices that contribute to healthy plant growth? So we see that when you plant and when you plant those, when you actually grow those crops, are you using the optimal season or adjusting things? And are you maintaining optimal plant density? Sometimes increasing the plant density contributes to pest reduction. Sometimes you have to, change, like either increase or decrease depending on the pest or the, or the disease pathogen. And then what kind of soil conditions are we growing them? Then optimal irrigation and nutrition are always very important. And then improving soil health, something again that has been gaining a lot of attention in the past few years, like soil health, because of all the studies that show the importance of microbes in the soil and the relationship of microbes and other, biological stimulants basically that have on plant health. So improving plant soil health is important. Then regularly monitoring and addressing those stresses in a timely manner is another part. And sanitation, removing dead plants or infested plants or infected plant material. And these are generally good agricultural or cultural practices that contribute to healthy plants. Everybody agrees? So among these are the things like irrigation, nutrition, and soil health. These are the things that biostimulants contribute to. We don't have any relation with the season and other things, but this is where biostimulants have a critical role because they increase or they optimize nutrient and water uptake. And then, by adding these things to soil, they improve soil health. So now coming to various categories of plant biostimulants. I'm not going to go into the details of various of my studies and how biostimulants improve various things. I'm not going to show that. This is an overview. This entire presentation is an overview because I like about teaching the strategies rather than giving solutions for specific problems, because strategies help you, anybody, like, when we teach the strategy, the individuals can fine tune them to suit their needs. So now looking at the categories of plant biostimulants, different books or different sources may have different number of biostimulants, but this is what I put together in my recent book chapter. So many of you are familiar with these arbuscular mycorrhizae. There are a lot of them, and glomus and the other Gygospora and Paraglomus are some of the common ones. And you know that they have a relationship with plant, and they help plants absorb more water, so they could impart a drought tolerance. They can also help plants withstand salt stress, and they increase the nutrient uptake. And because they are biological organisms, and then with their association with the plant, then they can stimulate resistant reactions in the plant, like systemic resistance and so on. So more or less, all the biostimulants have similar impacts, like to varying levels and triggering different mechanisms, but it is more or less the same for all of them. So we have these arbuscular mycorrhizae, then entomopathogenic and other fungi. You have heard quite a bit about trichoderma being used as a soil amendment or a biological kind of like biostimulant. But certain species of trichoderma are also biopesticides. As I mentioned, or I might not have mentioned, I don't know. As I mentioned earlier, we're not getting into the regulatory aspects of this, which one is a pesticide, which one is a biostimulant. But it is more about what these biostimulants actually do. How do they work? How can we use? So if you look at Beauveria and cordyceps, they are entomopathogenic fungi. And you always saw, until 10, 15 years ago, always saw them as biological control agents or microbial control agents. And the commercial formulations are sold only as biopesticides. But I think there are 1 or 2 strains of Beauveria. They're sold as biostimulants. The reason is there has been a lot of research, and I conducted several experiments in this area exploring what kind of non-entomopathogenic role that the entomopathogenic fungi have. So they work like mycorrhizae. They have, because they are soil fungi, they have to survive in the soil when there is no insect host. So how do they do that? They have a relationship with plant. They just colonize plant tissues and do more or less the same as mycorrhizae. So they increase the nutrient and water uptake. They, kind of trigger some resistant mechanisms in the plant. And they also convert, or they actually, when they kill an insect, they take that nutrients, nitrogen from that insect and give that to plant. So plant provides a space for them when there is no insect host, so the fungus survives. But when there is an arthropod host and the fungus infects, it can give the nutrition back to the plant. So that is the kind of relationship they have. So I looked at their impact in cabbage, and then I looked at their impact in strawberry and various ways of, and also they are, they actually antagonize plant pathogens too. So in addition to killing arthropod pests, they have, they protect plants from pathogens, and they also act like mycorrhizae. So here, that is why I put them in this category. Then the next one is plant growth promoting rhizobacteria. There have been a lot of studies, lots and lots of studies. If you look at, search for PGPR, you see a lot, but I don't frequently see growers using them. So this is where, extension or doing research that the growers can actually immediately use, that benefits growers is important. And also taking that information, all this information about all these microbes or any kind of product or technology to the grower so that they can effectively use is important for IPM. So that is the communication part that I previously mentioned. Then the next one is protein hydrolysates. So we have a lot of these materials based on plants and animals. And as you see here, although we have some of these like microbes here, right? But once you kind of come here, it is no longer a microbe, it is like a chemical. It just happens to be of a natural origin. Then humic substances, these are, when biological materials degrade, then, the organic matter, and then they're converted into these humic acids, and it happens over centuries of decomposition. So these humic substances also have this biostimulatory effect. Then algal extracts. You probably heard about this seaweed extract, right? Seaweed, that is a macroalgae, and then you also have this microalgae, different species of them. And again, it is the proteins or kind of complex carbohydrates and other materials in these algae that have this kind of impact. And then we have botanical extracts. And again, these are quite popular, not just as biostimulants, but they have been used for generations or centuries as biopesticides. And then silicates and phosphites. Here they sound like nutrients. So again, some regulatory guidelines might put these in different categories, and then companies might be selling different products, modified products, to meet or suit the needs, meet the requirements. So these are, basically silicates and phosphates based on sodium, potassium, and calcium. They strengthen the plant tissues. So as a result, it becomes difficult for the pathogen to actually cause the infection, or insects to either oviposit or feed on plant tissues, because they're harder to chew on or insert the egg ovipositor. And then the final one is chitosan. It is a complex or polysaccharide that that arthropods have, and then mainly these insects and shellfish have. Some of these chitosan products are sold as biopesticides, but it is also a biostimulant. So you can see microbes to these animal-based materials They could be fatty acids, or they could be proteins or protein-based materials, or they could be carbohydrates. So all of them have these biostimulatory effects. And how do they work? So they induce systemic resistance. That's the main mode of action. And they also build soil structure, because some of them contain organic matter. Some of them are applied with organic matter, so they build soil structure. And wherever there are microbes, they increase the microbial activity because they are microbes themselves. But at the same time, if it is a kind of organic material based biostimulant, they contribute to supporting existing microbes. So as a result, basically you have increased microbial activity when you apply them. And they also regulate several biological processes, and they release volatile compounds, and then they attract beneficials, as you just see here. And then they also have various other mechanisms, and that improve plant performance. So this is what biostimulants actually do. And as I mentioned, these processes are very complex, and they overlap quite a bit. So because of that, I'm not going over all those details, and just wanted to give you a general overview here. And now quickly, I want to show what induced resistance in plant, how it works. Again, there are different sources explain this differently, and there is some confusion, and then there is some overlap again about which one actually triggers what kind of mechanism, but I will simplify as much as possible. When plants are exposed to these biotic stressors, or they could be pathogenic. If in terms of microbes, they could be pathogenic, or they could be non-pathogenic. They don't have to be beneficial, but those avirulent strains, like if you look at Fusarium, there are so many species. They're neither beneficial nor pathogenic, but or maybe they are like a weak pathogen. So when you have these pests, pathogens, non-pathogenic microbes, or certain chemicals, or maybe all chemicals actually, when you apply a chemical, plant has to react. So then this salicylic acid pathway is triggered, the genes that regulate this pathway trigger, and then they also produce these proteins related to pathogenesis as a defense mechanism to protect the plant from this invasion, or the exposure to any of those biotic or abiotic stressors. So as a result, you have systemic acquired resistance in plants. So it is called SAR. So it is as a result of these pathogenic or non-pathogenic microbes and chemicals by triggering salicylic acid pathway. The other one is when plants are exposed to these beneficial microbes, the things that we talked about earlier, some of the ones. So there is this different pathway, this jasmonic acid pathway and ethylene pathway is triggered, and pathogenesis related proteins are also produced. Some say that whenever plants are exposed to any kind of any kind of stress or these beneficial microbes, both kinds of pathways are triggered, and in some cases, some of them actually trigger both of them. So it is a little bit confusing depending on which source you are reading, but these are two different pathways: systemic acquired resistance and then induced systemic resistance. They sound so similar, and then they sound like induced resistance. So you have induced resistance, which has two mechanisms. One is systemic acquired resistance and induced systemic resistance. So this is how plants respond to stressors or beneficial microbes. And then having, so when we apply these biostimulants, it is usually this induced systemic resistance that we are expecting to be activated. So the first one is SAR is reactive. So when there is an attack, they react. But what we are trying to do is be proactive, prepare plants for a potential invasion from these pathogens or pests. So it is like, vaccination, probiotics to plants, or giving biostimulants or exposing, treating plants with biostimulants is like vaccination, preparing plants for potential invasion. And then again, when I did this Google search, like just two things, pesticides and induced resistance in plants, this induced resistance is again more of a recent thing that we are hearing quite a bit. I wondered that what kind of research had been done about pesticides. Pesticides have been around for quite some time, right? But if you look at that, not a whole lot of difference. 3.4 million articles, whereas induced resistance in plants has almost 3 million, or little over 3 million. So what it tells is that this information has been around for as long as possible, for quite some time, but we haven't been paying attention, just like we don't pay attention until it is too late. So that's what happened. So we heavily emphasized on using certain things, certain strategies. And now that everybody is conscious about the environmental health, human health, and better agricultural or sustainable practices, we are trying to incorporate these alternatives. Now, how do we use these biostimulants? We have these 9 categories, and how do we use and what do they do in the end? So we have various application strategies. They can be, we can treat the seeds, or we can treat the transplants before planting or immediately after planting. And then depending on the kind of material, they can be applied anytime throughout the crop production, either by applying to the soil or as a foliar spray. Then how do they work? As we just discussed, it is induced systemic resistance, or it could be just, not just, it could be improving soil structure and increasing the beneficial microbial activity, or, again, inducing systemic resistance, depending on whether it is a foliar application or soil application. Then how do plants respond? They increase the photosynthesis. As I mentioned earlier, I didn't go over how it happens in every detail, but they increase photosynthesis, increase antioxidant, oxidative enzyme activity, and increase volatile organic compounds, strengthen plant tissues, especially with calcium or say silicates or calcium-based materials and some minerals, and they improve the nutrient and water mobilization, increased stress tolerance, and these things lead to increased root and shoot growth. Then that increases, and that again leads to increased yields, or leaf or fruit quality, and enhanced shelf life. And this also, applying these biostimulants can also, because of this production of volatile compounds, it increases the attractiveness of plants to biocontrol agents. Then beneficial microbial activity, either by applying these biostimulants or by applying organic matter kind of biostimulants that support microbial activity. And then reduce pest and disease severity and their damage. And this results in optimized use of water and nutrients. So we don't need to over fertilize, or we don't need to apply water. Water is a scarce commodity in many places, and we know its value. So, sometimes we could significantly conserve moisture by using these biostimulants because they increase the soil structure, water holding capacity, and improve the mobilization as we saw. And then pesticides, as I mentioned earlier, when plants are healthy, then you don't need to use as many pesticides. So it is like maintaining a healthy diet, right? Eating healthy, exercising, all those things to maintain general good health, and taking medicines when we get sick. So we don't pay attention to the importance of healthy living until we start using, or sometimes we don't, still never pay attention to that because medicines seem to be easier to take rather than having a disciplined lifestyle. Same thing happens here with the plants. So if we invest in growing healthy plants, we can rely less on plant protection afterwards, and then reduce risk of pesticide resistance, again, an important part of IPM, and improved biological and microbial control and ability to grow crops under unfavorable conditions. This is also a big advantage. What would have been otherwise not possible to grow in a particular place or in an environmental condition, with the help of biostimulants, we might be able to do that. And again, improved environmental health because we are optimizing a lot of these inputs and reducing the burden on the environment. And optimized production costs. Sometimes investing in these biostimulants can reduce the need for pesticides and other inputs. So, whether it is water or fertilizers or pesticides, we are optimizing. So as a result, we have increased returns. So this is how you use biostimulants as a part of improved cultural control, and that contributes to sustainable production, food production. And you can read this, all this, and this, like, initially I gave you the QR code for my IPM model, and then this QR code is for this book chapter. I paid a big fee to get this as an open access chapter so that growers can use it. So you can read it. And with this, I end my talk, and thank you all for your attention. I think we have a few minutes for questions.
Surendra, I have a question. So yes. I enjoyed your talk. So it was it opens, a lot of thinking on how we can use this, biostimulants for pest control. But also it makes you wonder, like, how to go about using them, because is there guidelines? For example, if I want to use them in blueberries or cranberries, I don't know where to start. Like, do I need to test all 9 of them, 9 classes? Like, are they biostimulants that work better on certain crops than others?
Yeah, that's actually a great question. There are some biostimulants that work. Like, for example, if you look at brassica crops, some of them don't form a relationship with certain mycorrhizae. So it does require some effort. So I take you back to the earlier IPM model. That is where the communication part is. Like, we continuously have to read and understand. And obviously, if you are a blueberry researcher, you would read only blueberry related information. But again, it depends on our thinking, right? Like, before I got into biostimulants, I didn't know much. But once I started working in those high value crops and the kind of issues that growers are having, and the more I read, so I came up with some of these things. So how do we know? I think it is everything is a continuous learning process. So we continuously have to update ourselves depending on what crop we are working on and what kind of pests, and how do we use the biostimulants for your spotted wing Drosophila. If you start looking at that kind of thing, then you will see some information, and then you definitely you may have to do more research, because there isn't a lot of information for certain specific situations.
So in terms of organization, if people could raise their hand and then Cesare can call, remember, there's students that are supposed to be asking questions here also.
Yeah, there is a question.
Questions in the chat.
Yeah. Kate, do you want to ask do you have actually two questions? Do you want to ask your questions?
Yes, thank you. So curious, one, when you have your microbes interacting with the plant and there's a nutrient exchange, does that not modify or break your definition of what a biostimulant is? Because I recognize that you do have things that don't have a nutrient exchange. How do you balance all that?
That's again a good question. So what is under the soil or inside the soil is like entirely a different kind of world that we don't even know what exactly happens. And depending on how many, how much of these microbes you're applying, it could be a different kind of reaction. So you're right that not all of them have the same kind of nutritional benefit, but you could be applying certain microbes to antagonize plant pathogens. So again, it depends on your need, what the crop requires. If there is if there is fusarium or verticillium and you're applying bacillus, one of the bacillus species, or trichoderma, that is one kind of a response. But if there is a salt related issue, or if there is something else, then you would be applying something else. So how do they work with what is already there? It depends on what is already there and what you are applying and the load you are applying, the frequency. So it's not always an easy answer, and that is why some growers don't see the benefits from using them. Some of these benefits are long-term. You may not see during that crop season. If you're growing the crop again next year, you might see that, but that is why the kind of adoption is slow for some of these biostimulants. You're welcome.
Cesar, you're supposed to call on me. I have my hand up. See me? Sorry, you're muted. Sorry.
I'm muted. There we go.
But I think Shanglu had raised his hand earlier. Shanglu, you want to go?
Okay, Surrender, good to see you.
Good to see you too.
I think last time I met you, you were still at UC extension. Anyway, yes. You have a slide showing that undernutrition or overnutrition. How overnutrition would affect the plant susceptibility to pests?
So when you change that, higher nitrogen, to give you a simple example, higher nitrogen usually increases the carbohydrate content. And, there are several studies. For example, if you apply more nitrogen than what is necessary, plants can become susceptible, or mites, spider mites can thrive and multiply more because it reduces the concentration of plant phenols or other defensive materials. So it makes it easy for those pests to thrive. Whereas a well balanced nutrition may not contribute to that. So
right.
Yeah.
So I guess if we look at all different pests, so undernutrition may have more pests. Optimized have different sets of pests. Yes. Then you have more nutrition, more than necessary nutrition. Then you have another kind of pest.
That is true.
So yes, I guess it varies at a different level.
It varies, yeah. It is not like a same thing, but it varies. And then again, applying more usually seems like a healthier plant. It looks green and it's growing well, but you have to look at how much of that is leaching and how it is contaminating groundwater or leaching into other water bodies and so on.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Dina, you want to ask your question?
Yeah. So I'm coming from a very different field, and I was actually not familiar with the concept of plant biostimulants at all. That's why I was actually really interested in just, what are you doing? What are you proposing to do? So, and I guess so you gave just a really broad overview.
Broad overview.
Right. And so it's sometimes a little hard to get it all. And frankly, what your presentation sounds very familiar. I'm sure you've had this mentioned before, to the way, we say people should drink, should eat yogurt and should have, probiotics, and it's all very, holistic and obviously likely good for you. But you started with the concept of IPM, which involves an economic aspect. And Cesar's question was like right down to the nub of it, is that how do you start? What's the SOP? What are we supposed to do? Give us some like guidelines. We all can sort of understand that this probably some of these are going to be good for the plants. But how do we assess again, I go back to Cesar's question, where do we start when trying to implement this in our IPM program?
Very good. The starting point is my book chapter, and you can read it completely, and it has several examples and citations where, for example, if it is a blueberry, and how actually that book chapter has a lot more information, how these biostimulants are used for certain things, like it has all those details, but that gives you just a general overview. But again, there are several companies that are producing these, like, if you like I mentioned, if you're in blueberry, for example, when I was working in strawberries, there are a lot of these companies that have microalgae, there's seaweed extract and all kinds of bacterial or fungus-based materials. Those companies have that. So what we see is some of them already have done some research. Some of them come to me to do research. So, our job is to just look at those things, right? What is published, and is there something we could do to enhance, like, fine tune for my crop, my region? So where do we start is, I'm not joking. There are several publications already. Like I showed, there is so much information.
Let me get, so for the interest of, myself kind of, but more for the students, you're saying that basically this is now a sort of an increasing, there's been a big increase in the interest, and there's a lot of opportunities for actual science to figure out how it's actually working.
That's right.
Okay. I have other questions, but I give opportunity to others to jump in.
Yeah.
Shannon, go ahead.
Thank you. That was actually a really good talk. I remember some years back, decades back, when this was first coming up in the horticulture industry. And so it's more of a broad-based question. I'm kind of just curious of your perspective on it. I love the fact that we're actually getting some really good hard science behind the proper use of biostimulants. I could tell you in agriculture and horticulture, there's been a lot of misuse of biostimulants. So I guess my question is, the examples I'm thinking of was using biostimulants to control growth patterns so that you can reduce frequencies of having to prune, using biostimulants to increase growth time so that you get yield productions that are faster. Those were kind of like ethical conundrums that we were dealing with biostimulants for quite some time. And there was an economic drive for those things. What you're talking about is actually a much more sustainable approach to the use of biostimulants. How do you propose, outside of just offering the science to the industries, how do you propose actually getting that word out so that they're used in a much more sustainable way than probably the way they've been used over the past 2 decades?
Well, that is actually a difficult question. Changing the attitude is tough for all of us, right? So there are multiple points of start for this. One thing, the industry that is developing these products should invest in good research. That is important. Like, don't oversell anything. Like, if you a lot of times if you see the sales pitch, it sounds like it solves all your problems. So that's where you growers usually lose their interest. If it is too good to be true, it is not true. So industry has to do good research, and they have to have people who explain science to farmers. I don't agree with the fact that growers, you have to explain things in layman's terms to growers, because I see California farmers, they're very smart, educated, they understand all complex scientific, they know more than we do, because they're managing multi-million-dollar businesses. So that, if you don't trust, so they understand. So companies should invest in their research and outreach from their side. And again, universities should also invest. If you look at who is working on these kinds of things, you don't see many people. Very few people work on this, and that is unfortunately even in California. There weren't many people. And if you look at microbial control people in the US, very few. And all the seniors are either retiring or changing their paths, and we don't have enough. So the investment should be on research and education, and then only we can get the message, the strong message across. And we also need that science communication is also there, right? Like everybody is talking about that, and that is why I included that communicating with public about what we do, how food is produced, and what the impact of anything, like whether it is a chemical or biological or anything we use to produce food, what is the impact? So it is, many people have to come together.
We are over the time, but Dina, do you want to say you have another question or comment?
Well, it was really about you, frankly. It was the fact that some of the mechanisms Dr. Dara mentioned, this induced systemic resistance, sort of talked about the jasmonic pathway. And so and you also mentioned this sort of similar to a vaccine, but that seems to be just one of the methods, one of the mechanisms, right? But yes. So this idea that you're inducing a priori, sort of try to get, and you actually do mention specifically the beneficial insects, but the beneficial insects would rapidly get, maybe learn that there's the crying wolf when there is no wolf. So how is that going to work out?
So it is, yeah, that is a good question. But, a lot of these things are not just like you apply and immediately it is attracting, right? It has a lot of benefits, and that attracting beneficials is a small part of it. And then, sometimes there might be wasted energy or investment. And we also need to be aware of that over applying some biostimulants can stunt plant growth. I didn't get to mention that. That's kind of related to what you're asking. A couple of years or maybe 3 years ago, I did a study, and this company gave me a rate, and then they said, okay, apply. And then that plants were consistently smaller than rest of the treatments or untreated control, because the rate they thought was appropriate for that particular hot environmental conditions was not good. So that is why it is important for industry to do research, for us to do research and develop this information. And the next step is to take it to the growers. And then another important piece is it affordable? If these materials are too expensive, then again, they may not use it. So that is, again, industry's role to optimize the production costs and all those things.
Surendra, we have to stop here,
sure.
But we'll continue the conversation with the students. Let's take a 5-minute break, and you can stay on this call. But thank you very much for your talk.
Thank you all. Thank you.